Welcome to the Season 5 of the India Energy Hour podcast. This podcast explores the most pressing hurdles and promising opportunities of India's energy transition through an in-depth discussion on policies, financial markets, social movements, and science. Your hosts for this episode are Shreya J., Delhi-based energy and climate journalist, and Dr. Sandeep Pai, Washington-based energy transition researcher and author. The show is produced by 101 Reporters, a pan-India network of grassroots reporters that produces original stories from rural India. If you like our podcast, please rate us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the platform where you listen to our podcast. Your support will help us reach a larger audience. As India moves to reduce its coal dependence and reach its climate goals, the spotlight is turning to hard-to-abate sectors that are both energy-intensive and vital to economic growth. What would a realistic transition look like for these industries? And how can finance, policy, and innovation come together to drive change? In this episode, we speak with Girish Sethi, Senior Director of the Energy Program at the Energy and Resources Institute, or TERI, to unpack one of the toughest challenges in India's clean energy journey: decarbonizing the steel and cement sectors.
Welcome, Girish, to the India Energy Hour. We have interacted in the past, but I really wanted to sit down with you once to just explore um, the topic of steel and cement decarbonization, especially in the India's net zero story, and try to get a sense of that. But so welcome to the India Energy Hour podcast.
Thanks, Sandeep.
Great. So I think, as per our tradition in this podcast, we would like to start with you and like with your story of different people take different paths to get into this energy climate space. There is no one set path. In fact, uh, you know, I know people who were engineers and then got into climate. I know people who are from English literature background. So we just want to start with you and your story and how did you get into this space? And yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think so. You're correct. So, in my journey in this field, so I've come across many people from different walks of life. So, I am from the traditional engineering field in India. I think everybody gets into engineering. The parents tell you to, okay, engineering is the field. You should get into it, become a doctor or an engineer. So, I was the one who preferred engineering field. So, I got into chemical engineering. And then after completion, as is normally the trend, I think at that time, I passed out in maybe if I can go a bit deep into those days, I passed out in 1985. It's almost now 40 years, I think. In fact, we celebrated our 40th alumni a couple of weeks back. So, and that was the time when we passed out, and the best at that time was to getting into some state-owned public sector companies. So I also got into, I of course got into many fields, including the energy field, ONGC and those kind of PSUs, but I prefer to get into the research area and joined this entity called the Cement Research Institute of India at that time. So you might have heard it's called the National Council for Cement and Building Materials. It's a body which is under the Ministry of Industry and primarily caters to the cement and the building material sector in India. And that's where I started my career. And that, in fact, exposed me to the cement sector. And in fact, that is a subject which you wanted to discuss today. So that really exposed me to the cement sector per se. In the college days, you just read theoretically. We just had one chapter on cement sector, but then that's what brought me into the real world of how the industry functions and how you really see the full-fledged machines. So I spent almost 1 year training, learning how cement is produced, in both at a theoretical level as well as practically for a few months in the cement factory. And I spent some time, almost I think around 6-7 years in CRI, Cement Research Institute. And then since cement is a sector, as you might be knowing, it's a very highly energy intensive sector. So anything which you have to do has to be around energy, and being from the chemical engineering field, that was the area where you work on material balances, energy balances, things like that. So that brought a lot of interest to me on this field. And I then actually joined a master's program in energy studies here at Delhi, at IIT Delhi. And that I continued. And then since that was energy field, and then TERI came into the picture. And during that transition period, I switched over to TERI, the Energy and Resources Institute, which is primarily working in the energy, environment, sustainability field. And almost now, I think I'm here for the last 30 plus years. I think 32, 33 years I've been at TERI. And then I think subsequently also, while I was at TERI, I got an opportunity to really get an exposure internationally as well. And I did another master's again in a field which is linked to energy, climate. Those were the early days. You would remember, I think, that the UNFCCC, the COP, and all those things at that time. The Rio conference was in 1992 at that time. So that really kept on moving in the climate direction. And I did another master's from Germany, which was the University of Applied Sciences. So which brought in that angle of how the development cooperation works and how energy and environmental factors work in. So all in all, I think it was a typical field where you start with engineering, then you get into a specific field. And here in TERI, of course, I started again on industries with steel, cement, and all these areas, but and all other heavy industries. And we have been working ever since in topics related to energy efficiency, energy audits at TERI all these years. And then in the last round, I would say close to around 10 years, 10 or 8 to 10 years, I think, with this whole discussion on industry decarbonization, or more so in the last 5-7 years, I think, started getting involved more closely into the aspects related to how these sectors like steel and cement and other harder to abate sectors should really get also decarbonize slowly. What are the issues? What are the barriers? Things like that. So the role of green hydrogen and things like that. So that completes, in a way, one, I would think that now that I started with cement, moved on to everything, and down towards the later part of my career, I'm back to cemented as this is the karma, it just revolves around. So that's how the whole journey has been all these years, around 40 years or so. I've been working in this field now.
That's quite a wide and long journey, and a lot of assignments and a lot of sectors that you have, crossed and touched upon. Which has been your most exciting stint? What did you enjoy the most? Which sector did you enjoy the most working in?
Since you're asking this, I would actually say that it was not really these sectors, cement, steel, which we wanted to talk. I think some of the work which I did in the mid 90s to say 2010 or so, around 15 years, in another energy intensive sector, which was actually glass manufacturing. That's also very highly energy intensive. And those were small scale industries actually, because steel, cement are big, large, heavy industries. So that was something which I really enjoyed. We worked on an area where nobody really wants to get into. It's a very difficult segment. And as TERI, we were supported by some of the research work by some of the European partners. And we developed new types of furnaces which were far more energy efficient, less carbon intensive, and supported the local small scale glass manufacturing industries in a small town called Firozabad, not very far from the city of Taj, Agra, I think. I don't know whether you have visited or not, but that's a place where all the bangles in this whole country, which the ladies wear, glass bangles, are manufactured. So I still relish that uh, effort, which is almost 15-year effort, and we converted the entire cluster into something which everybody today even calls it as a TERI furnace. So since you asked, I can relate that as some area which it's very close to my heart. And I still try to remain in touch with those people who helped support my journey here in the energy field, in the industry field, in TERI as well.
No, it's a beautiful city and a beautiful market and beautiful sector as.
I think you will remember that, if I can say in this episode, since both of you are Indians, uh, there is this famous song by Sri Devi,
Yeah.
one of the Indian villains, mere haathon mein no chudiya hai, or something of that sort. So that was shot in that city, in the market there.
Right, right. No, I mean, I'm also thinking and reflecting, in this broadly defined public policy space, it's sometimes really hard to measure impact, right? Like, because any topic, so many people are working on it. But to really see a real impact is something very rare and something that you can pinpoint. So, congratulations on that. I want to now move to the topic of today, which is really focused on a very strong and important topic of the future, which is decarbonization of steel and cement. So, before we start, I just want to do a 101 of this. So, listeners who are not from this field kind of understand a broad understanding of where the steel and cement sector is at. Who are the players? Are these mostly state-owned companies or PSUs? What are the short-term and long-term targets in these two sectors?
Yeah, thanks. I think so. Let me start with the cement sector. Since I started my journey with the cement sector, so maybe I would like to just mention for everybody that the cement industry in India is primarily, I would say, almost 100% is actually with the private sector. It's almost 100% private sector. Maybe there's just one state-owned company which is still there, one or two. But mostly the entire thing, you can say, is actually a private sector. And we have all big, large players, hardly any small players. There are a few mini cement plants, but majorly it is all the large, major cement plants in the country. Big players like well-known names like ACC and Ambuja, Dalmia, Ultratech. And what is interesting here in the cement sector is that it has gone through a very interesting cycle. You did have some international players in the Indian cement sector till a few years back. But now you see mostly the whole industry is dominated by the private sector, the Indian-owned private sectors. So whether it is the Jindal Group, the JSW, or it is the Dalmias, I think the ECC Ambuja, which is owned by the Adanis. So all these were there. But earlier, till a few years back, we did have Lafarge and Holcim and a couple of others. We do have Heidelberg Cement still in India, but they are not the major players. So it's dominated by Indian-owned companies, and they are doing pretty well, I think. So that's in terms of the major players which we have in the cement sector. In terms of the process and how the industry is structured, let me say that the Indian cement industry is one of the most energy efficient cement industry in the whole world as of today. I'm not saying not just in developing countries, including the developed world. In terms of the specific energy consumption levels, many of the plants in India, both in terms of the thermal energy consumption levels as well as in terms of the electrical specific energy consumption levels, we have plants which are the global best. But yes, averages are slightly higher. But almost all the plants are 99.9% are dry plants. And the Indian cement industry over the years has adopted the best available technologies which are available from around the world, whether it is the Europeans, from the Germans, the Danish or the Japanese, which new developments which have come. And one of the reasons I would also say is that why the Indian industry has become very, very efficient and they have been adopting the best practices globally is because the first, of course, is the growth of the country as a whole. And cement is something which is used for daily construction, whether it's a small household thing or in the large infrastructure projects. So you have new demands coming in, all the newer developments which were happening around the world. So they were being adopted by the machinery manufacturer, by the Indian cement industry. In terms of the total production, I think today we have close to around 625 million tons of cement produced in the country, maybe slightly higher. And that is the production capacity, but the production is slightly on the lower side. Around 425 to 430 million tons of cement is produced. And India is the second largest producer of cement globally, next only to China. And also in terms of the types of cement which are produced, just for the knowledge, so we, for the audience, so I think we produce almost 75 to 80% as the blended cements, whether it is the Portland slag cements or the Portland pozzolana cement, which basically uses fly ash, which is a byproduct from the thermal power plants. And only around 20-25%, less than around 20% is the ordinary Portland cement. Whereas you will find in many countries actually around the world, it's practically the opposite. I was actually 2 weeks back, I was in South Korea, again on a cement-related conference. And in my presentation, I had to say this, that because the first presentation was by the South Koreans, the Korean cement industry, and they said that we are 80% OPC and 20% blended. I said, for me, it's the opposite in India. So we are pretty efficient in terms of using the secondary raw materials as well. So this is broadly the structure, I would say. So large producer, but the fact is that since the country is growing, our per capita consumption is still lower, and there are possibilities of further growth. We are close to presently around 250 kgs per capita, whereas the global average is around 540. So we are still half of that. So that's broadly on the cement sector, I would think. Close to, I think, around 160 or so large integrated cement plants. And also very interestingly, India is one of the countries which has separate clinker manufacturing, which is clinker is an intermediate product. And then you have the cement, which is a final product. So you have a situation where you have only grinding plants very close to the places where the fly ash is generated or where the slag is generated. So you can transport the clinker and then have that. So we have separate independent grinding plants also in the country, close to around, I think, 120, 125 grinding plants are there. So that's on the cement structure, industry structure, since you were asking. On the steel, it is slightly different. Again, we do have large players in the Indian steel sector. You have the big names like the Tata Steel, the Jindals, the JSW, JSPL. And we do have one of the oldest public sector units, SAIL, the Steel Authority of India Limited, which is still very active. They have a few plants, mostly in the eastern side. Yeah, on cement, I would say that again, in terms of the location as a country as a whole, we do have cement is normally will be plants are located next to the places where you have the limestone deposits. And steel is mostly concentrated in large numbers in the eastern part of India, in the states like Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Jharkhand, West Bengal, and a few also in the southern part of the country. So we have those large players in the steel sector, but we do have, those are in terms of the structure, so larger players, and then you also have the comparatively smaller players, which are again located quite a lot in the eastern belt of the country. They are using a technology which is, maybe I'll come to that later if you want to discuss. So, but I think in terms of structure, so we have large players, we also have smaller players in the steel sector. And then you have still smaller players who are mostly using the scrap melting route. So Indian steel industry is that way very, very different than the global cement industry that way, if one would like to global steel industry, let me put it, because we have not just the big units like the blast furnaces to produce the crude steel. We also have DRI units which are based on non-coking coal, which is India's only country which is having this kind of a structure. And we also have small-sized electric furnaces, which are scrap-based furnaces. So the structure is very different. Again, in terms of the capacity, if you look at the steel sector, similar to the cement, we are the second largest producer of steel globally, next again only to China. Again, the per capita steel consumption is close to around 100, but again, the border wages are higher. So huge opportunities, close to around 140, 150 million tons of steel is produced in the country. And absolutely very high growth prospects in terms of the new capacities which are coming. So broadly on the structure of the industry for both steel and cement, in cement, it's all big, large players. In steel, you have large players as well as comparatively smaller players. In terms of the cement, we have industry which is very efficient, latest, state of the art in many cases. In steel, we do have smaller players which are very different from the large ones, but broadly following the BFBF route as well as others. Sorry for a long answer, because I think it's important to really put that into the perspective if we are really wanting to talk about how do we really make these industries more efficient and decarbonized.
No, that was extremely helpful. It gave a very comprehensive overview of the sector and also opened the path towards something that we are discussing in this particular episode of the podcast. I'll just steer a bit into the reliance that this country has on coal, and steel and cement sector is usually imposed as a villain in this sector because of their huge reliance on coal, then their reliance on imported coal as well. So, in this debate of coal dependence, where is the steel and cement sector?
Yes, you are correct. I think so. Apart from the power sector, which is the largest user of coal in the country, the next two biggest sectors are cement and steel, actually. So I would say that in case of steel, broadly one would put the coal into two buckets, the coking coal and the non-coking coal. So mostly the thermal coal is non-coking coal, which is used in the power plants. So the steel industry, the blast furnaces which we have, so they normally require coking coal. So India is importing large quantities of coking coal. We don't have huge reserves in India. So we are dependent on coking coal. But we also have these, I mentioned earlier about these comparatively smaller plants, which are called coal-based DRI plants. Direct reduction of iron, DRI is the short form of direct reduced iron. So there they are using the non-coking coal, which is available domestically, and sometimes also they import. So the country is hugely dependent, steel sector is hugely dependent on coal. There are just, I think, 3 or 4 plants which are having gas-based DRI production, and that too in the eastern side of the country, on the western side of the country. Same way in the cement sector, I think most of the plants are using, majority of the plants are using coal as a major fuel, but they are also dependent. Some of them are also using large quantities of petroleum coke, pet coke. And lately, I think some of the plants have started using other alternative fuels like I would say industrial wastes or agri residues or MSW waste, shredded tires, things like that. But still, the dependence is heavily in both the sectors on coal.
Yeah, so that is actually a good segue for my next question, which is looking towards the future. Given this dependency on coal, like globally, there are lots of technologies that right now, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but these are all technologies of the future, and there are some pilot projects. But where is the Indian steel sector and the cement sector at in terms of moving away from coal-based production of steel and cement to other forms using hydrogen or other sources? What's happening in that space and how it has evolved?
Yeah, I think let me start with, say, steel. So, in steel, you rightly say, I think that hydrogen has been talked about quite a lot, I think, as an option now for the industry to move forward and start using hydrogen produced from renewable energy sources, as they call it, as a green hydrogen. So, yes, that is definitely an option. But I would also like to mention that as of now, if you really look at it globally, and globally, I would put Europe as a center in this case, because countries like Sweden and Germany and quite a few, and some of the other ones, have been talking about hydrogen-based steel production. Even today, as of today, you don't have a full-fledged large commercial plant operating 24/7 on hydrogen-based DRI production. Yes, the technology has been, the suppliers say that it is there. So hydrogen will definitely become a major, I would say, hydrogen-based production of iron, and then ultimately steel would definitely become one of the major transition pathways for decarbonization pathways for the Indian steel industry. But till the time one really sees the costs, so what is inhibiting that? So one, of course, is the cost for hydrogen-based DRI production versus the conventional technologies which are already there, whether it is a natural gas-based DRI production or on coal-based DRI. So that is a cost issue. But also, I would say at the same time, the important thing also would be the role of the raw materials which actually are needed for a hydrogen-based DRI production. So, for example, in case of Sweden, as I understand, I think they have a very good high-grade iron ore available, very high quality. Whereas in India, iron ore broadly is not of that high-grade quality. So you would need some more pre-processing or better access to that. So hydrogen surely becomes as one option one can move. The other thing which people keep on talking about is the possibility of CCU. But I would say that there are other things which, these are all medium to long term options which we can talk about. Of course, one can say that yes, when the price of the hydrogen comes down, then one can move very fast and swifter and quicker and get into hydrogen based production. But till that time that we don't see the prices for hydrogen, green hydrogen coming down, there are many other options where I think the Indian steel industry must move forward, whether it is in terms of energy efficiency. So still there are options available in all the plants on this, on the scrap utilization, on the role of renewable energy, RE, circularity, material efficiency. So all these areas become very, very important in a fully decarbonized steel sector for that matter. In case of cement, the story is slightly different. Yes, people have talked about hydrogen use, but there's, at least in case of steel, you do see some projects in under construction and likely to come on full stream in Europe on hydrogen use in steel. But in cement, you don't see that, actually, even in the developed world. So the other option, and the only option which they say for full decarbonization of the cement, is the CCU or CCS plant. And that too, again, one of the first plants was just commissioned last month in Brevik on CCS. Again, that is not fully decarbonized. So again, in case of cement, you do have other options where one should move forward. And luckily, as I mentioned, Sandeep, earlier, I think that we are using blended cements in the big time in India. So, which means that we are using all these secondary supplement SCMs, which we call it as supplementary cementitious materials. So we are using in large quantities. We can still increase the quantity in some form and still have a lower clinker factor. So that would be one of the biggest options moving forward in case of the cement. The other option, of course, would be the other decarbonization measures which one can talk about there. But in terms of the fuel in cement, yes, you can theoretically say that I can electrify a kiln, but there is no electrified kiln today operating anywhere, and electricity coming from, say, renewable energy sources. Yes, we can on the fuel move towards alternative fuels, things like biomass or other waste fuels which are available. And this is where I think India is lacking. So let me put it that you have plants in Europe, in Korea, elsewhere around the world where they use these waste fuels in big time. Whereas in India, we have not been able to utilize the waste fuels in such large quantities. I think, if I'm not wrong, the total percentage of alternative fuels which is used in the Indian cement industry is close to 5 to 7, 5 to 6% still. Whereas in Europe, you can find plants which are using 30, 40, 50. And I think you even heard in places where they can go all the way to 90, 100% alternative fuels.
I'm so glad you explained, a lot of people in this space I've seen, they're obsessed with full transition, in the sense that you use fuel as a source, coal as a source, move away completely. But I'm so glad you nicely described there are things that can be done, which perhaps may not lead to a complete transition, but will definitely do savings in terms of emissions and all of that. Why is the industry not jumping on these opportunities? Is it still expensive for all the other opportunities, like you said?
I would say that I think in case of cement, if you see, Indian industry has been very, very active. So as I mentioned, I think so we are using all these supplementary cementitious materials. Now the other issues could be, can we still further increase the blended cements in terms of increased percentage of fly ash? Then the issue comes of the standards. So the process of having, because cement is something which is a mandatory standard. So you need to amend the standards. Again, very nicely, I would say that apart from slag and fly ash, the other option in cement is other newer supplementary cementitious materials. So globally, I think in some parts in Europe, even Africa, Cuba and all, it developed, they called it as a cement which is called the LC3 cement. So that has become one of the talking points globally. And LC3 cement is something, it's a limestone calcined clay cement, LC3 in short form they say. And that can use calcined clay. So the clinker factor is lower, around 0.5. So you can use these clays which are available in large quantities, as they say, in different parts of the country. But again, it's a process which will take its own time in terms of identifying the sources, the mining of these calcined clays. And I would also like to mention very clearly that cement is a sector where it's a bulky material. You just can't transport from one part of the country to another part. So the cost economics of how these other cementitious materials are available, whether they are close to the cement plant sites, whether that would play a part or not. So India, after a long process, I think in 2023, we also got this standard for LC3 now, which was notified by the Bureau of Indian Standards in 2023. And I do understand that some of the cement plants are now looking at producing LC3, which will require some modifications in the process. And it's again a story where, since you asked why, so with this example, for example, for LC3, somebody has to demand that new product. And that's a very typical thing. So you should have the demand for the low carbon product as well. So who is the one who's going to demand that? It has to be the real estate developers, big infrastructure players. So somebody has to really demand for that. So it's also a bit of a, I would say, chicken and egg kind of a situation. That yes, is there a demand for the new product which I produce from the manufacturer side? And from the other side, oh, why I don't have it? Why should I be using it? So that is as an example I'm saying. But in many other areas, I think the industry has been doing well, at least the cement industry. On the scrap also, I would say in case of steel, yes, the country has been using. We do keep on talking about, people say increase the scrap percentage because it's circular economy. But I always ask this question, in a country like India, do we throw anything? We don't throw anything. Scrap is used fully. Maybe we can improve the collection process, the productivity can slightly increase, but we don't throw anything. So we use scrap fully, whatever is available. So there are avenues available, but on energy efficiency, yes, things are possible in smaller plants. One can do that. We, as I mentioned, in some plants we have the best available, but there are others who are not meeting the global standards. So 10 to 15%, 7 to 8%, depending upon which plant we are talking about, those options exist. We can surely move towards RE big time. There are plants which are captive plants, which are still using old thermal-based plants, so they can start using, at least for new installations, we can start using RE for the electrical energy. But I think I would also like to mention you, and I think all the viewers, all the people who are listening to this, that it's important that electrical energy can play only a limited role in this whole story. It's in not just in these two sectors, but in the industrial sector. We did some research, some back of the envelope research over the last few years. Let me say that out of the total energy which is consumed in the industry sector as a whole, almost 70 to 80%, 75, 80% is actually in the form of heat, thermal, and only 20% electrical. So even if you shift everything to RE-based electricity, we still are not moving. So that's again another point I just wanted. But yes, nevertheless, moving towards RE is definitely an option on the electrical side. And I think that's all I would say basically. And the new binders and new research is happening on new technologies which is there.
That's great. You mentioned about how RE is an option in electrical energy. I On that topic, I wanted to discuss a bit about industrial decarbonization. India has this, set its own targets for, greening, increasing the share of non-fossil fuel energy, and everything. Though, and industrial decarbonization is a part of our energy transition plan, though there are no set targets. So, can you tell us, are there any government policies around steel and cement sector which aim towards their decarbonization? What is actually happening on the policy front?
Yes, you are correct. I think so. One should see these in tandem. One cannot say about industry decarbonization and energy transition slightly different, as I just explained. So, energy is an important component in all these industrial sectors. Like in India, just taking a step back, if you really look at the overall energy consumption in the country, almost 55 to 60% or close to 50 to 60% is actually consumed by the industries. If you look at the total pie, close to 300 million tons of oil equivalent is actually used in the industries. So industry becomes one of the largest users of energy. In some countries, it is not that case, but in not this much level. But for India, it is almost 50 to 60% of the total energy which is consumed in the country is actually in the industries, followed by transport and buildings and residential and agriculture sector. So it's very difficult to really say that industry decarbonization is different than energy transition. So if if energy transition has to happen, we have to have industries moving towards low carbon options. Now, on the policy side, let me put it from the industry perspective. So the first one, at least on the steel, I would say that we have in India what is called the Ministry of Steel. And perhaps I would say the only country in the world which has got a separate Ministry of Steel. So, which is a big advantage, I would think. So, over the last 3 or 4 years, we have seen a lot of action, proactive programs, policies from the Ministry of Steel in India. And after almost 2.5 years of discussions, deliberations with the various departments, with the various players, the Ministry of Steel came up with a document which is called the Greening of Steel in India, GSI. So this very, very detailed document, which was published by the Ministry of Steel, was released in September 2024. It's not even 1 year back. And it was a process where they created, I think, around 13 task forces on different topics ranging from energy efficiency, scrap, pelletization, many topics, including cross-sectoral issues like skilling and RE. So all these task forces worked for many, many months and came up with this very comprehensive, detailed document, which is available on the Ministry of Steel website. And we at TERI are lucky that we were a part of almost 7 of these task forces. And many other organizations have contributed to that, apart from the main steel industry players. So that is a very comprehensive document, and they are coming up with newer and newer policies. And one of the first things which they have, the Ministry of Steel, which has come up, is a definition on the taxonomy of steel sector in India. What would you call it as a green steel or a green? If we say that I want a green steel, so what is it, green steel? We need to have a taxonomy. So they have formally come up with the green steel taxonomy of India, and this was again released in just 6 months back in December 2024. And they are coming up with the new GPP program, the Green Public Procurement Program. The Ministry of Steel is coming up. Their consultations are going on with the various ministries, including I think the Ministry of Finance. So in this new taxonomy for green steel, they have already decided or given the definition for what would you call it as a 5-star green rated steel or a 4-star green rated steel or a 3-star green rated steel. So they have been emission intensity numbers which have been notified, which have been suggested by the Ministry of Steel. So if you are below 1.6 tons of CO2 equivalent per tons of finished steel, it will be a 5-star green rated steel. And if it is between 1.6 and 2, it would be a 4-star green rated steel. And if it is 2 to 2.2 tons of CO2 per ton of finished steel, it would be a 3-star green rated steel. So, but let me mention that presently we don't have anybody producing even at this level. The average is 2.4 and above, I think 2.5 in some cases. So that's a big step forward. So that would be something which one will look forward. So Government of India, through the Ministry of Steel, has already come up with this. The other most important thing I would also like to mention in terms of the policies which you mentioned is the National Green Hydrogen Mission, which the Government of India announced 2 years back. And it's almost 19,800, I think around $3 billion of total government incentives for green hydrogen production. So which is in two forms. One is for the incentives for actual green hydrogen production. The other is for electrolyzer production. And that's around 18,000 crores. And already bids have been floated, and some of the companies have already been awarded these kind of incentives by the government. And one will see some action, more proactive action in this area. In addition, let me also say that as a part of the National Green Hydrogen Mission, they have come up with a separate small program, which is to again a pilot demonstration projects for where government is going to provide support for pilot demonstration projects on green steel production. So again, those have been announced. And similarly, on the cement side, I think on CCUS, the Department of Science and Technology announced a few initiatives just a few weeks back, where some of the Indian companies have it's more on the R&D side. Again, I think example which I mentioned about the LC3 cement, that's a standard which was under development. It's again a very nice move towards moving towards a low carbon cement. So that's again an initiative of the Bureau of Indian Standards, and many of the institutions have come forward to support that. So there are quite a few, I would say, initiatives where the Government of India has been supporting. Apart from Government of India, I would say that the roadmaps for both cement and steel have been put in the public domain. The roadmap for a net zero Indian cement sector was prepared by the Global Cement and Concrete Association, GCC India chapter. TERI supported them in developing that. So it was released in the month of March this year. That's available on the websites of TERI as well as GCC. It lays down the pathway how the industry is going to move. Similarly, many other organizations, including TERI, have come up with the roadmaps for the steel sector as well over the years. So that shows that there is a real vibrancy and there is an interest of the industry as well as the government to really move in the direction of green steel and green cement production. I would just like to mention that from that perspective. So green hydrogen mission is one of the key areas, I think, where one has to move in that direction, I think. And then, of course, Niti Aayog is coming up with its own plan. So there are multiple actors at various levels which are acting. State level, the various states in the country have come up with their own green hydrogen policies. So there are incentives and programs which will be in place in the coming months and years.
Wonderful. I think this is so nice and clear just from a layman perspective as well. I just want to move the conversation towards the direction of finance. Now, whether it's green hydrogen, whether it's any other incentive, and it will require some finance. And in the context that the consumer right now perhaps is not asking for green steel or greener forms of cement, uh, are there financial mechanisms available that larger companies in the cement sector or smaller and larger companies in the steel sector can use, say carbon markets or others that perhaps they can use to adapt some of these new technologies, even if they're currently more expensive?
Yeah, I think since you mentioned about carbon markets, of course, Shreya asked about the policies. I didn't mention about the Perform, Achieve and Trade scheme, which has been a very, very successful program of the Government of India running for the last many, many years, which is a program which is supported by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. So it's a program where it was a mandatory program where targets are given to the large industrial consumers to reduce their energy consumption in a given 3-year period. So from the baseline, you have to reduce it to a particular level. So different cycles of the PAT have been announced over the years. And now this whole PAT program has been kind of changed over to what we are calling in India as the CCTS, Carbon Credit Trading Scheme, CCTS. And it was again a process where the amendments had to be made to the Energy Conservation Act, and it went through a proper government process. And now this whole Carbon Credit Trading Scheme, CCTS, is actually in place. Just a few months back, 4 sectors were already notified, which includes cement, aluminium, chlor-alkali and pulp and paper, and a few more sectors, including iron, steel, fertilizers, textile and others, will get added in the coming months and weeks, I guess. And this CCTS scheme will have the baseline, which is 23-24, and this will be linked to this PAT cycle, which I had mentioned earlier, the cycle 7 and 8. So we will have a full-fledged CCTS system in operation in this country now, the Carbon Credit Trading Scheme. And this would be managed under the Environment Protection Act of 1986, unlike the PAT, which was under the Energy Conservation Act. So you will have almost all the obligated entities in the cement sector, which is close to around 180, 190 cement plants, which will be part of the CCTS scheme. And a fairly large reduction program has been kind of notified for that. So that will be one avenue, I would think, which will be moving the needle in the right direction. But let me mention this point that all this will be only incremental, in my view. What we are talking about in terms of large-scale decarbonization, whether it is in the form of a hydrogen DRI as an option or CCUS as an option, these are very, very huge costs which we are talking about. And for that, apart from uh, the incentives which are available from the National Green Hydrogen Mission, I don't see any other major domestic state-owned initiatives which have been announced. So to me, international financing will have to play an important role if we need to have this deep carbonization options moving in the country, specifically in terms of a few initial pilot plants, whether it is on green hydrogen, DRI, or a CCU or a CCS plants for the steel or a cement sector. So to me, international finance will really have to play an important role to at least to have the first few plants up and running in the country. I'm not saying that the whole full cost will have to be borne, but at least the incremental costs in such cases. And it's important to note that CCU or a CCS is an add-on cost. So that's one important point on the financing I would want to mention. And also, I think equally important is the whole story of the capex and the opex. In case of hydrogen DRI, the whole issue is related to the opex. So today, if I am not getting hydrogen at a price which is comparable to the total cost of steel production, which is coming from coking coal, it's very difficult to really see any specific steel sector player fully moving quickly into that. So they will be looking at how this compensation happens or how things will be moving in that direction. So to me, it's a story of the capex and the opex, how the prices for hydrogen come down over the years, and then the industry will be moving in that direction. And international finance will have to really play an important role in all these aspects, I would think.
If I may ask about this carbon markets a little more, because this upcoming carbon credit markets in India, be it the voluntary or involuntary, is pinning its hope a lot on the steel and cement sectors. Because of being the major suppliers. But the market currently remains, voluntary. It has not been made mandatory. I just wanted to get your thoughts on this. How much of a success would it be if it would be made mandatory first? Firstly, should it be made mandatory? Second, what is the outlook of it in India specifically?
No, I think let me just mention. So maybe what I want to convey is that the PAT program, which was there earlier, the Perform, Achieve and Trade scheme, which was there in India, which was actually the savings in terms of energy, tons of oil equivalent, was actually a mandatory program. So the CCTS for these obligated entities, because that's the word which they're using, obligated entities. So there have been targets which have been given for, as I mentioned, for example, for the cement sector, for this 186 obligated entities, the target of close to around 264 million tons of CO2 equivalent has been given. And the reduction target is around 3.6%. Similarly, for other sectors like aluminium and others, the targets have been given. For steel, again, they will be giving. So those would be obligated mandatory targets which will be given. Now, what I was trying to explain was that this is again a very small part. But to get into a situation which is telling somebody to, okay, go in for a full-fledged hydrogen DRI plant. So these carbon markets cannot, this is my personal view, they cannot play a major role there. There again, I think the whole issue is of the technology, the demonstration plants, the pilot plants. So those kind of things will really have to play an important role. And there it comes the cost of the initial capital and the role of international finance, which will have to play an important part in that. So voluntary markets, yes, anybody wants to go beyond that, it's good. But to me, it's important that one has to recognize the fact that these are new technologies. as I was mentioning, like in case of steel, for example, if we are talking about a hydrogen DRI plant, you need to ensure that yes, the technology works with the Indian raw materials, with the Indian ores, at the Indian site conditions. And even to reach that level, you need, to me, I would think that you need a lot of effort to really get the preliminary reports, the DPRs, the full-fledged plant-specific support. So all that is very, very important. So the risk capital and those kind of things will be very, very important to really get us to those levels of how do you really de-risk the whole investment in these kind of newer areas or the newer sectors. So access to low-cost capital, de-risking investment by whether it's the early stage support for RD&D kind of things, or even in any other newer PLI schemes, GPPs. So there could be many ways to really accelerate that whole process, which will de-risk the investments in these high new areas.
Right. Wonderful. I think we had a great conversation. We're almost up at the hour, but I have to ask you this last question before we close, which is really about like, Girish, what should be the short and medium term goals for the next 5 to 10 years? What should be a few, 3 or 4 things that should happen for India to really accelerate? I understand that there is a little bit of policy landscape, a lot of people are thinking about it, but what should really happen to see some pilot projects, to see some real, big projects on the ground?
So I would think, as just at the risk of repeating myself, so I would think that there are still many areas in both these sectors, steel and cement, but also in the other sectors as well, in the industrial sectors, where energy efficiency can play a role, specifically in medium and small industries, small and medium industries. Yes, RE can definitely play a very important role. So in the immediate next few years, one should continue focusing on these aspects of energy efficiency, RE, circularity. In parallel, I think it's very important, according to me, to lay the ground for a full-fledged demonstration projects on hydrogen DRI in India. Whether it is through a support by a special purpose vehicle from the government of India. In fact, TERI came out with with a policy brief on this topic, that maybe an SPV or something of that sort needs to be created to set up the first full-fledged hydrogen DRI plant in the country. Whether the international community can play a role in providing low-cost finance, whether it is in the form of extremely low-cost loans or in terms of the upfront capital incremental grants for a first of its kind plants. So to me, this groundwork in the next 3 to 4 years for a final investment decision for such kind of facilities will play a very, very important role. See, India does have a 2070 net zero target, which is not the case for many other countries. We think, oh, we have. But to me, these assets like the steel plants, they have a long gestation period, 30, 40, 50 years in many times. So it's not a long time from that angle if one looks at it. So it would be very prudent to have these low carbon demonstration plants or a full-fledged plant up and running in at least in the first part of the next decade, if I would say by 2030, 2035 or 20, between that period. But the construction and all these things does take time. So to me, the groundwork for a full-fledged facilities of these kind would be very important to move forward, apart from the low-hanging fruits which we keep on talking about in all these sectors.
Thank you so much. Honestly, this has been a treat just sitting down with you and talking, and just thank you for explaining, in very simple terms, the big picture, the nuances, and the path forward. I learned a lot, so thank you once again.
Thank you, Sandeep. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. It was a very comprehensive and informative episode, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you for listening to the India Energy Hour. Subscribe to this channel to never miss an update. To drop us a feedback, visit our website or write to us at theindiaenergyhour@gmail.com. We are on Twitter. You can follow at TIEH_podcast and get in touch with the two hosts at Shreya_J and at Sandeep Pai.